Okay. Right. Should be us live now. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to our very first joint Facebook Live with Beyond. It's very exciting to be here and to be using a new piece of technology as well, which we've had fun playing with over the last few days. So let's hope this is going to be a really great discussion and a really good session this evening. So we're very lucky to be joined by Jess from Beyond, we worked quite a lot together in the past, and I know that she's a fountain of all knowledge for Beyond. But also, we're very, very lucky to be joined by two of our oldest and very dear clients as well. I'll let them properly introduce themselves, but we're really grateful that they've taken the time this evening to join us. Thank you very much, and over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Tobias. Yes, you're my fountain of all knowledge at SuperControl too, so it's great to have you on board. My name's Jess. I've worked at Beyond for several years at this point. I am an Australian who was living in San Francisco, who's now in London, so please excuse the accent as it dips in and out of various influences. But I work with all of our customers in Europe at Beyond, making sure that they can leverage dynamic pricing for their properties. So I love working in the short-term rental industry. And on that note, I'm really excited to welcome Paula and Les. Paula, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, hi, I am Paula Irwin and I'm based in Ireland, and I am the owner and manager of Decoy Country Cottages. So that's a collection of 8 holiday homes which are in the courtyard right beside my house.
Fantastic. And how about you, Les?
Hi there, everybody. Les Robinson from Gale Holiday Homes, based up in Dingwall in the Highlands. We're a rental agency and property manager for around about 120 properties at the moment. We've been a SuperControl customer since 2008. So been with these guys a long time, and with Beyond with you guys for just over a year now.
Fantastic. And how long have you been using SuperControl and Beyond, Paula?
So I've been with SuperControl since 2009, and I've been using Beyond for just a year now as well, just over a year.
Fantastic, love it.
Great. So one of the things that we really want to focus on in this session are some of the myths around dynamic pricing. So it's great to have actual real live users of Beyond to help us to kind of explore some of these myths together. But I just want to run through just a couple of these, and we can then explore them together as we go along. So the first of our myths that we're going to be looking at this evening is around data. So do you need perfect data in order to be able to use Beyond? We're also going to look at how Beyond works with seasonal pricing. So is it going to price me too cheaply in low season and therefore lead me to undesirable guests staying? Is it also going to potentially make me way, way too expensive during the high season and potentially look at overcharging what I believe I can actually charge fairly to my guests? And also that sort of persistent idea that dynamic pricing means loss of control. So by having your pricing done by a dynamic pricing package? Do you actually lose control of it? And also, is it just really for the big players, or can it benefit any size of property portfolio, from a single property owner to a large owner operator, as well as the agencies? And finally, how do we deal with repeat guests and making sure that we don't alienate those who've been coming up for us for years and used to paying a certain price for their stay? So, with all of that in mind, Jess, do you want to start off, and we can sort of see where the discussion goes?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'd actually love to know, first off, Paula and Les, how did you set your pricing before you started using dynamic pricing, and what made you decide to take the leap into the unknown with dynamic pricing? How about you first, Les?
Yes, I thought, well, how did we work the pricing beforehand? Basically, I sat in a dark room for months on end trying to look at trying to scrape data myself of various OTAs, and what we would mainly do is we'd look at the historic pricing that we were generating for our clients, for our owners, and we would compare where we were wanting to set that next year. But we'd also then go on to the OTAs and other agencies and look to see what the market was doing. So very time consuming, very, very intensive, and great when you do it once, but it might change tomorrow and the day after, as we found out in the last 18 months when things have been very, very fluid. So very time consuming.
I can imagine. And would you do that once a year, like in anticipation of opening up rates for the next year, or?
As I say, we've been operating 15 years now. So I think back in the day, you would maybe sort of think, right, let's, you'd be May, June, let's get our pricing sorted out for next year. I think long gone are those days. So I think as time went on, it's a fluid marketplace. So we would need to be looking at this continually. So once we'd done it once, within a matter of weeks, we would be looking at it again, and we would maybe looking at properties that weren't performing the way we wanted them for the owners. So again, we'd spend a bit more time on that, but it's a continual process.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Paula?
Well, I wasn't quite as thorough or scientific as Les, but in the very beginning, what I did was, having had no experience in the hospitality industry, what I did was I kind of gauged, like if you were staying in a youth hostel, what would you be paying per night? If you were staying in a campsite, what would you be paying? And then what would you expect to be paying in a sub-catering per person per night? And then I kind of worked out my prices based on that. So I kind of set a nightly rate per person, and then just multiplied by the number of people sleeping in the house to get my weekly rate, and then change that per season. And that's basically how I started pricing. I opened in 2007. And then the financial crisis happened in 2008. I had to rethink that. So I kind of went back then just to lower weekly prices to generate business. And then I basically only used to sit down once a year to do my pricing. And I would price my smallest property at a weekly rate. And I had 4 different rates, maybe a lower, mid, and a high rate. And then I would leverage my other property, different sizes, based on that smallest property. So I would go up slightly depending on the size of the property. It wasn't very scientific, but it was the best I could.
No, I mean, I think that's a great approach. Sorry, Tobias, but especially before, I mean, you were using the resources that you had available to you. And, for a long time in the short-let industry, like some sort of comp setting or looking at hotels or hostels or campsites, that was the information that was available. So yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah, and that's really typical. So in SuperControl, I work a lot with clients who are setting up their accounts, and half the time they will say, they set their pricing by looking at the cottage down the road and adding £50 extra because theirs was slightly nicer. So that's a really, you're by no means alone in doing that, Paula. So, but no, that's really great. Moving on from that sort of early sort of experience, when you decided to take the plunge and try out dynamic pricing, what was the biggest sort of initial surprise or maybe even challenge that you faced in or experienced when you started exploring the concept?
Okay, so for me, I decided to explore the concept of using beyond pricing after listening to Robert do a webinar. And I think that was it was around the time that we were discussing master council when COVID happened. And there was so much going on. even though I had decided to explore, it was on my weekly list of things to do for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I just couldn't set aside the headspace more than the time to sit down and actually figure out how it was going to work. A lot of the problem was that I was using an old computer, and the way it appeared on my computer was completely different to the way that it appeared when I saw the demo online. And so I didn't, it took me a while just to get my head around setting it up. But when I did do it, I found it surprisingly easy.
And how about you, Les? What was your sort of journey into using dynamic pricing?
Yeah, as I mentioned there, we were finding it hugely time-consuming, concerned that we were missing opportunities, potential opportunities, both in occupancy and both for maximising rates for our owners. And I did actually, prior to going with Beyond, try your nearest competitor. And I didn't find that particularly successful. I did that for probably the best part of the year, and I struggled with that, to be honest, and it didn't convince me. But then, again, as Paul was saying, when speaking to Robert about it and seeing Robert's presentation with what you guys are doing, it was, for us, it was a no-brainer at the end of the day, because it's looking at the market continually, and that takes that workload away from us. Doesn't mean the control's gone from us, which we'll come on to, but yeah, it was a huge time saver.
So can I just add one thing as well, that the biggest barrier to me actually doing it was because in SuperControl I used percentage pricing for short rates. And at the time that I set up dynamic pricing, there wasn't the ability to mirror that in Beyond Pricing. But shortly afterwards, after raising my concerns with Robert about why I wasn't jumping on board, SuperControl actually enabled that facility.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Paula. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's some daily pricing works better for some clients. The percentage-based model works better for others. I use daily pricing, and I find it really works well for me because I have B&B rooms and quite short stays, so that works. But no, absolutely, it's the flexibility is nice to be able to fit. You still get the benefit of data, but it fit it into what works best for your particular market. So yeah, absolutely. You mentioned just a little bit earlier, Paula, the dreaded C word, COVID. How have both of you kind of found using dynamic pricing post-COVID? Really valuable to be able to track those trends and the market much more closely, because it was so volatile, because booking patterns were so sort of strange at that point. I felt really reassured that Beyond was tracking that for me. So how did both of you kind of find navigating that strange period when we were allowed to reopen but the market was still quite up and down?
Well, for me, we were allowed to reopen on the 4th of June. And I actually had longer term guests staying until the end of June. Okay. So by the time I was able to take holiday lets in July, it was actually our school holidays. And I found the demand was really, really high, and Beyond Pricing was amazing for the rates that I got. Yeah. So it worked really, really well.
And how about you, Les? What was your, because you've got quite a spread portfolio.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. We've got, we're the sort of one of the largest independent apartment operators in Inverness. We've got about 40 odd apartments in Inverness city centre, and that urban market is completely different from the rural market, where we've got the other, the other 70, 80 properties are spread across the Highlands, and some of them very rural locations. So the urban market in particular, when we went on with dynamic to start with, we only put the urban side on because, as you say, at that point it was working best with daily rates, and the length of stay pricing, percentage pricing, was a bit of a challenge to get that to work out to meet what our clients were expecting. So we put the urban side on, and it was great because, as international, the majority of urban traffic in cities international. And as that dried up completely with COVID, it was very challenging marketplace. Still continues to be a very challenging marketplace, actually, in urban. And I think without dynamic pricing, we would have really struggled with that, because it has been so fluid and so dynamic in that marketplace.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you, Les. That's great. So, Jess, do you want to take over for another couple of questions here?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, we've talked about this a little bit, Tobias, as well, and I'm interested on the take from this group on, the difference between using dynamic pricing with Beyond compared to a third-party tool like cottages.com or Airbnb. And I know this isn't sort of explicit in one of the myths, but I think it ties into the control issue and also the, dropping your prices so low to have the undesirable guests. And I was wondering if either of you had trialed, Les or Paula, using cottages.com or Airbnb smart pricing, and if that had given you pause before jumping in with Beyond.
I didn't. I was with cottages.com and I left them a while ago because I just was very disappointed with the customer service. And I didn't try dynamic pricing with Airbnb. But I love the fact that in SuperControl, I can uplift my rates on Airbnb, which I continue to do with Beyond Pricing, and that seems to be working really well.
That's great. How about you, Les?
Yeah, I think, I agree with what Paul's saying there. Control. I think we have agencies, we'll have owners that will jump between agencies, whether they be the national guys or the more regional guys like ourselves. And when we've had clients and owners come on board from the likes of the big guys like cottages.com sites or whatever, and we say dynamic pricing straight, you can see them wince immediately. And it is to do with the control side of things, because, and I'm maybe talking out of turn, but it seems to be there is no control with that. It will sell at whatever rate, and you've lost the control. And I think with Airbnb as well, I think that's more inclined to sort of price against the marketplace, which is not what dynamic pricing is about, because that just ends up, if everyone was doing that, using that tool, then it'd just be a race to the bottom, and that's not what it's about. I didn't venture into using any of these guys' dynamic tools.
Yeah, and I think that's so key. Like it's the race to the bottom concept, or someone like Airbnb who has two customers, the person looking for a place to stay and then the person renting out their apartment, and inherently there's a conflict there. Like somebody's going to lose in that equation, and so working as an agency or an owner with a dynamic pricing solution to help you set your pricing appropriately for the demand we're seeing in the market. There's just less competing priorities, so we tend to find that it works better for agencies and owners.
I mean, in a way, it's almost, they're two totally different things. Your own dynamic pricing package is working for you to get you more revenue wherever the booking is coming from. These Airbnb or cottages.com smart pricing type tools are really designed to get bookings to come through that particular platform. I mean, I used the smart pricing on Airbnb before I had my SuperControl account and I was managing it independently, and I got more Airbnb bookings, but the Airbnb bookings were cheap. They were underselling me constantly. So since actually using my own dynamic pricing tool, I've realized how different they are. The concept may seem similar initially, but actually they're doing two totally different things. So yeah, it's a really important thing. I think a lot of people have been kind of put off dynamic pricing simply by bad experiences through these third parties. And one of the key myths that we really do need to bust is actually that's not how it's meant to work. That's not how it should work. That's, it's not actually working for you, whereas Beyond, for example, is.
Yeah, I mean, if I just sort of add to that, I think the link between SuperControl and with Beyond, you set your minimum rates and you can set them seasonally. So you've got that safety net there, if you like, but there's also additional safety nets in SuperControl as well. So you've got within the price planner, it says do not take a booking below X amount of pounds. Yeah. So regardless of what's happening, of what the market is saying, you should maybe consider selling that. If that doesn't work for you as an owner, or we communicate with our clients and owners to say, where do you want your stop loss to be, if you like, we can set that additional safety net within SuperControl as well. So you've got two safety nets there where it will not sell below what you don't want it to sell at.
Absolutely, and that's really it's so reassuring to have that. Particularly if you take shorter stays, it's very easy for a very short stay, even a one-night stay, to fall below that minimum that really not worth having the guests in the property almost, is it? So yeah, it's really good to have those sort of dual safety nets there that you've mentioned. Yeah. Yeah, Jess, should we move on to a different area of myth busting now?
Yeah, sure thing. What did you have one in mind, Tobias, or?
I think possibly it might be good to kind of explore a little bit what the kind of key advantages that our panelists have found in terms of, for example, saving time on admin with using Beyond. So I know you've touched a little bit on it, particularly Paula, your pre-Beyond sort of admin job. But for both of you, how have you found that kind of shift in terms of pricing admin whilst now using Beyond?
I found it great, to be honest. In fact, if anything, it's made me very lazy, because once I set my base price in Beyond, I actually haven't gone back in to adjust it. I probably need to do that. I don't know what the ideal number of times a year is to go in and readjust the price. I probably should be doing it once a year anyway. But so far, I've been so happy with the rates I've been getting that I haven't felt the need to go back in.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to jump in there quickly, Paula, because I know, your account has been performing really well, which is fantastic. And I think, the good thing about Beyond is you don't have to be in there every day tweaking the base price, but you could also make some adjustments. So especially if you're in a stable market that has, a stable supply, because there's the demand side, but the supply side obviously is, a big part of this as well. If there's a stable supply of shortlets, and people aren't adding hot tubs or renovating their houses, if everything stays fairly consistent, then you shouldn't actually need to update the base price that often, because what we'll do is we'll see the shifts in the demand in the market side and, adjust the price accordingly. Things might be a little bit different, Les, like in an urban centre, for example, where, people, it's a bit more volatile on the supply side, especially if you see sometimes, a big event come to town, like maybe the climate conference in Glasgow, and everybody, rents their house to go stay with their friends somewhere else to try and, capture on some of this demand. Then we see the supply side shift, and sometimes we need to make some adjustments there too. But that's great that it works for you without logging in all the time. But just since we're talking about this, best practice is we do encourage people to spend, 5 minutes per property per week in Beyond. Just going in, taking a look, looking at your most recent bookings, where perhaps your minimum price is preventing bookings coming in low season, for example, is kind of what we're focused on at the moment, and then make any adjustments. But it's great to hear that it's working without that much intervention.
Oh, wow, it really is working very well.
Yeah, I think we have aspirations to continue growing the business, and we were very conscious of the fact that as we increased the numbers that we had in the way of owners and number of properties, we were finding it difficult to spend the amount of time that we needed to spend on looking at rates dynamically ourselves by doing by as I mentioned earlier on, by scraping the data ourselves or whatever. So we were getting to the stage with growth of what do we do about this? We're probably looking at employing a revenue manager. That can be quite costly and also difficult to find someone with that skill set, particularly up here in the Highlands. It would be someone remote. So I think that, with Beyond, that was the solution that we needed. The expertise was already there. The cost was equivalent or maybe less than we would pay for a revenue manager. So that allowed us to release time to focus on growing the business whilst ensuring that all existing owners' properties were getting looked after and we were maximising the rates for them.
That's really great. So one thing that I think we really must cover as part of our myth busting is this idea that Beyond pricing will inflate your prices too much. Obviously, the aim is to get you more revenue, but we all, I'm sure, understand that there is a sort of limit to how much you can charge in good conscience. And we've heard these horror stories about £7,000 for 2 days in Cornwall. So was that something you were concerned about when you went into dynamic pricing? overinflation of your rates?
Well, when I saw the rates that I was getting during the summertime, which were probably better than I've ever had before, my biggest concern was actually were people going to, well, just the point that you've raised about the value for money, and how I was concerned that it might impact negatively on my reviews. Okay, so my experience over the summer has been that my Booking.com reviews have been worse, but my Airbnb reviews have been consistently very, very good. And my own reviews on TripAdvisor have been consistently very, very good. So I don't know if anybody else has had that experience of a different level of reviews between the two platforms, but that was my experience this summer. I don't know whether that was a COVID hangover, that everybody was just generally a little bit pissed off because of COVID and the restrictions it was having on them. That was my experience.
Yeah, I didn't really find that. I advertised on all those platforms, and I found the reviews were consistently good. But what I did find was we were getting a slightly different sort of guest. You know, the guests who we were getting, since we actually were charging more, were more appreciative of what we offer. They were not just looking for a cheap breakaway. They were actually really kind of looking for an experience, and we had really, really good guests actually since raising our prices. So that's and reviews that reflected that as well. That happy guests. So how about you, Les? What was your experience with all of this?
Well, you know, I also heard the stories about £7,000 for a week or 2 weeks in Cornwall, and that was quite alarming because I didn't actually own a property in Cornwall. But can you charge too much? Yeah, no, but I do take the point. But it is a value of money that. But I mean, the marketplace again, people have choice at the end of the day. There's many properties out there. We've noticed that the lead times have shortened for the urbans, certainly, but where we're seeing the rural bookings coming in at probably 20-30% higher than we would expect, and some of these properties are performing really, really well, and it's been very surprising indeed. At the end of the day, these properties are in a marketplace where people have choice. So they read the reviews are consistent. We've had no drop off in scoring and reviews. It's been fine. There's a choice at the end of the day. If they don't want to book, then there are other properties they can book at the end of the day. So I don't really have an issue with how Dynamic is pricing maybe 10, 20, 30%. Again, that's down to you as an owner. You choose how much you want to mark that up, 270 days ahead, 300 days ahead, or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, on that topic, how do you have a regular sort of established clientele of repeat guests who will stay with you every year, possibly even in the same properties? And if so, how have you, Les, navigated that? And then I'll ask Paul, I think the same thing, because I think it is a concern. It is one of those key things, is how do you manage keeping the repeat guests happy? You know, repeat guests are obviously a blessing in many ways, but you know, is it something that we're getting too concerned about, our repeat guests? So how can you know, what's your experience of that, Les?
Well, that's a marketing strategy at the end of the day, right? You know, you need to detach that from any form of pricing, beyond pricing to a degree. So, I mean, how you deal with that? For example, say that beyond, you've set it at 270 days, it's 10% above. 300 days, 360 days, it's 20% above. You can always go to your repeats, and you should be communicating with them anyway if they're repeats, rather than letting them come to you and booking directly on the website, and give them the opportunity, should you wish to do that, at a 10 or 20% discount, taking it back to where the base price would have been anyway, which you know is what they would have paid. That's again, from us as an agency, that's a conversation with the owners. Do the owners want to do that? Don't they want to do that? How do they want to handle repeat guests? But those options are there at the end of the day. So just because Dynamic is maximizing rates a year ahead doesn't mean to say that you have to sell to repeat guests at that rate. That's a choice again. It just depends how you want to chop it up, but it depends what you're running your business for. Are you running it to make money, or are you quite happy to have the level of business static through years, and you're quite happy that you've got 50% repeat guests? Again, that's a choice.
Absolutely. How about you, Paula? Do you have a good clientele of repeat guests who you've had to sort of navigate the change with as well?
Yeah, I do, and I think there's a danger that we will assume that guests think we are now too expensive, and that hasn't been my experience. I've had many repeat guests who have just gone ahead and booked online and have not mentioned the more expensive rates. So I've been very pleasantly surprised. You could easily feel guilty and think that you need to offer them a lower rate. And like I just had a guest who left me and she's just contacted me to come back at Christmas. So I've offered her a discount. But I guess the lesson I've learned is that I was just way too cheap in the first place.
Absolutely. And again, post-COVID, that's been, really one of the sort of silver linings of this whole period has been actually rethinking established patterns and actually embracing change on everybody's part. So for a lot of our clients who embraced Beyond right after reopening, everybody was raising their prices anyway because that was where the market was going. So it wasn't that unusual, and their repeat guests were happy to pay. So there's a lady who is a SuperControl client. She's got a single property, but she's really finding the benefit of Beyond, and a lot of her guests are repeat guests, often quite elderly. And she said that only one for the whole summer had queried why the price was different than the last 10 years he'd been staying. Everybody else just happily booked again, no questions asked. So yeah.
I think that's
sorry, it was probably, in hindsight, it was probably the best time to jump on board with Beyond because the rates were so different. Anyway, everybody was expecting rates to be much better. So I guess next year might be a little bit more telling, but I'm not changing path. I'm carrying on.
Yeah, Jess, do you want to speak to that space, about where the market is kind of going? Do you have sort of any data that suggests that prices are going to continue to be, rising generally across the board, or
Yeah, just before we divert to that, I do want to touch on something Les said, the idea of almost viewing repeat guests as a marketing cost or as a marketing expense. Because it's true, like you build this loyal brand, and if people come year after year, and to Paula's point, like maybe they've been paying too little the entire time. And perhaps if they're the sort of repeat guest that is frustrated by the price changing, you can, for want of a better term, like replace them with a new person who is going to become a repeat guest, who expects to pay at that price point and will continue to be an advocate for your property. So I know the repeat guest part is, everybody has to handle it the way that it works for their business. And I love the idea, Les, of, increasing rates into the future and offering repeat guests a discount. Another touch that some people use is, they pay the Beyond Pricing price, but they leave a bottle of wine for a repeat guest, or, some like local biscuits or something, just to make them feel like that they're having a special experience. And if anybody else wants any other tips, we have, it has to work for your business, but there are lots of ways that you can choose to sort of attack this part of dynamic pricing with repeat guests. So I just want to touch on that. And then to your question, Tobias, kind of what we're seeing for 2022 is, I can't make any promises, obviously, but I know that people are anxious about, what the summer will look like, particularly in sort of Ireland and the UK, if people can now, return to Spain, for example, or France, for example. And the fact of the matter is, like, we won't know until we get there, but we haven't seen any of, speaking broadly across the UK and Ireland, we haven't seen booking trends drop off significantly for next year. There's still a lot of uncertainty around what the world will look like and how easy travel will be. And for anyone who's been traveling internationally lately, I'll raise my hand here, like it's still challenging and it's not that fun. So, if I was looking to book a holiday now for the summer, I'd be staying local. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. But the great thing about dynamic pricing is that if we do see that take a monumental shift in April, for example, then, we will be looking at those trends and adjusting the pricing accordingly. But I was literally just talking to a SuperControl client just before this, who is seeing a big increase for October half break, like 2022. And it's because, we've just finished the holidays, and so people are preparing already for next year. So my prediction, I'll say it here and we can check back in a year, but I predict that we'll have another really strong 2022.
Well, let's hope your crystal ball is right.
Yeah.
That's really great. So I want to just move the discussion a little bit. We've had a really great question that was asked by somebody who's watching us on Facebook Live, and it's a two-part question. So I think if we look at the two different parts, that will help to unpack some more of our myths here. So the first part of it is, so this client, they have properties that are on an island. So what the question really is around, how does Beyond Pricing know that there's enough data to really support intelligent pricing, particularly for people who are maybe have a little bit more of an unusual location? And obviously, it might be really good to get your input as well, Paula and Les, about your kind of markets. Particularly Les, you work across multiple markets, whereas yours are all in one location, Paula. So let's talk a little bit about that if we can, just to kind of unpack that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly, just from the technical side of view on how Beyond works. And we hand launch all of our markets, and we are very focused on what constitutes a statistically significant number of properties in an area. And so that can vary. In New York, for example, it might be 4 city blocks. And then in rural Scotland, it might be several square kilometres. So what we would do on an island, for example, is yes, take a look at the properties that are in the surrounding area. And if there weren't enough there that we found statistically significant, we wouldn't price that area. So that's kind of how we approach it with like clustering the data at Beyond. But I'd love Paula or Les to jump in too.
Well, I think that the way that Beyond works, linking through your Airbnb account, is genius, because obviously there are so many properties on Airbnb compared to any other platform. It's probably the biggest. I don't know if it's the biggest, Airbnb.com. But so, I mean, there are properties on Airbnb in my area that I have no idea are there. I couldn't sit there and troll through all the properties. So there's a huge amount of data out there. And it's amazing how Beyond manages to collate all the data and then feed that data back into the system to give me the prices that I'm getting. So whatever they're doing, it's working, and I'm very happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And Jess, you might just mention here, obviously it's not just Airbnb or Vrbo that you're pulling data from. One of the things that we often get a question asked about is actually, where does Beyond get its data from? So maybe after we've heard from Les, you could just speak to that as well. But Les, I'd like to hear from you about how you found that kind of the Beyond's approach to your multiple markets.
Yeah, I mean, Highlands is obviously several thousand square miles, so it's quite, it's quite a diverse sort of portfolio. Yeah, I mean, as Paula mentioned it's scraping data from Airbnb, Vrbo, and other places, and that's what we were doing anyway. But we were doing it manually and not scraping as much data. And I suppose it's down to when you kick off, you have to set a base rate. And for me, when we take a new property on board, particularly if it is very rural and an obscure property, could be a 5-bedroom luxury property, just as an extreme, and in the middle of nowhere, and there aren't many of them in the locale, so it gets difficult. Where do you pitch that in? So I work with an account manager at Beyond, which is great. We have that conversation and we come to a sort of agreement of where we pitch that in. But once you've got it pitched in, as Jess was saying, if you spend 5 minutes a week looking at that, it might take you a few weeks, but you can look at the data that's within Beyond, and then you can make sure you've got the pricing right. So there's plenty of data out there, but again, unlike other tools that are out there, it is a tool. At the end of the day, you do need to use it. You do need to be looking at it quite regularly to make sure that you're. I mean, I know, Paula, that it's working well for you with the prices, which is great. But we certainly found with some of the obscure properties, you really do need to look at it until you find that level. But once you find the level, it's working away on its own quite the thing.
I guess it's easier for me, Les, because my properties are all in one location and they're all very similar. So it's a much simpler process for me. I don't envy your job.
And I just want to touch on a second part of the question. Well, I'll address your question, Tobias. Yes, we're looking at, we say over 5 billion data points a day from Booking.com, Vrbo, Airbnb, Expedia, TripAdvisor, kind of gathering as much information as we can about shortlets and hotels and other sorts of accommodation trends that we're seeing. And we've been doing that, we've been monitoring these markets since 2013. So we have a lot of great historical information as well as monitoring sort of what's happening into the future, which I think was the second part of the question, which is, how does it work for properties that take bookings 2 years in advance? And I was just curious, Paula and Les, how far open your calendars are into the future to take bookings. How about you, Les? Oh, sorry, Paula, you go first.
I was just going to say, I think I'm 18 months. I went from 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah,
and how about you, Les?
Yeah, same. I think when it was set up originally, it was maybe working slightly under a year, and that wasn't really working because, as you just mentioned there about the October holidays, people might think, stayed here, want to stay same period next year. Great, let's get it booked. Can't, no prices. So again, that's why we've moved it forward. We're working on a rolling 18 months.
And do you find that works for you? How much business are you turning away for people looking to book 2 years in advance, or do you say to them, check back in, or do you set special rates? How do you handle that discussion?
Yeah, again, marketplace. Some of the locations are particularly strong for, say, the American market, and these guys, for golfing, for example, and these guys they will want to book a year, 2 years, 3 years ahead. So you do need to accommodate that. But with the other side of things, if you're in an urban marketplace like city apartments, your lead times are less than 30 days these times, 30, 40 days. So it's a broad spectrum of how you deal with that. But certainly, I would say that you need to be pricing at least 12 months ahead, if not 18 months ahead.
Yeah, I agree. How about you, Paula? What's your experience?
Yes, exactly that. I very occasionally get inquiries for, and it would be for a firm booking, maybe 2 years ahead. And in that instance, I would look at the price next year and then kind of figure, okay, well, would I be happy with that rate the following year? And if I am, I'll just accept that booking as a one-off and just pop it into the system at that rate. But generally, I don't get actually that many inquiries that far ahead.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And to Les's initial point, the calendar is open 12 months by default, but it's literally like 365 days. So we find that a lot of people like to have it open perhaps 15 or 18 months to give, that buffer for repeat guests sort of wanting to book the same dates the following year, and then you can accurately quote that price. So if anybody watching is using Beyond and wants to have access to prices beyond a year, please feel free to just email our support team, support@beyondpricing.com, and they'll be able to make that adjustment for your account. What we see is beyond a year, it's easy to predict things like school holidays because we know when they're going to be in the calendar, but it might be a little bit more difficult to predict, I don't know, a music festival that hasn't been created yet, or a large conference coming to an urban centre for the first time. And so that's the only reason we sort of caution against just opening your calendars, in perpetuity, and by restricting it and having a little bit of the control, like Paula and Les just said, if somebody, emails in with a request or brings up with a request, you can always address that. But it allows you to make sure that you have your pricing really locked in. And then we also offer the function, to automatically increase prices after a certain number of days by a percentage. And so, I really encourage people to leverage that as well. And we actually have some of those increases set up by default when you start with Beyond. Because I think I was chatting with someone in the comments about this in the community a couple of days ago, but, having someone book far in advance feels great. It feels great to have that, secure revenue, but it also means that anybody looking at those dates, until that stay happens, your property won't be one of the ones that they even know exists. And so if somebody's going to remove your property from the pool of potential places where they can holiday, that's okay, but they should probably pay a premium for that. But yes, all of this is to say, if you want to price more than 365 days, we can definitely help with that too.
That's really great. Thanks, Jess. Whilst you're talking data, I've got a really interesting question that was asked by somebody who's watching us this evening. So I'll read the question just as it was written. How does Beyond deal with an OTA uplift? Most businesses do an uplift. Will this skew the data that Beyond uses for the algorithms to establish prices? That's a really interesting. I've not even thought of that, but she's right. You know, this is the most people who use SuperControl with an OTA will have some kind of uplift. I know I certainly do. Does that skew the data? Do you adjust for that?
That's a great question. And, you know, I think this ties into a key tenet at Beyond, which is getting booked at the right price, at the right time, on the right channel. Mm-hmm. And, you know, love them or hate them, the OTAs provide a lot of business. And as far as the pricing is concerned, in a nutshell, it won't influence or won't negatively impact the prices that we set. What we might find, for example, is let's say that you have an uplift on Airbnb of 15%. And then if we look at your booking source, if we might see that on your direct channels, you're getting a lot of bookings. And then on Airbnb, you're not getting as many bookings. Now, that's great. What that tells me is people are probably going to Airbnb, looking at your property, researching it, and finding a direct booking website, which at the end of the day, you know, then you get to maintain that customer. What we would look at instead of the markup itself being an issue is that if bookings dried up across the board, then it's probably a base price issue rather than an Airbnb markup issue, because then we would say, okay, well, nobody's booking on the direct website, nobody's booking on Airbnb, something must be off with the pricing. But we do track the source channel in our connection with SuperControl. So we would be able to see, for example, that if your Airbnb bookings dropped off significantly, that perhaps we could adjust the markup to counteract that. But also at the end of the day, what we want to see is getting booked at the best channel and the best time. So if you want to leverage Airbnb, kind of back to earlier as we're talking about as a marketing expense, then, you know, that's kind of where you can balance the percentage markup fee that you're putting in SuperControl with actually how many fees you pay into Airbnb to perhaps sort of understand that you're going to pay 5% extra for a booking that comes on Airbnb because you're, you know, essentially paying for that as a marketing cost. But I feel like I went around in a circle there. But at the end of the day, no, what we will look at is overall sort of where the bookings come in from and make sure that the pricing is working to get booked across the channels.
Okay, great. So I have another question that's come through for us, and it's something I wanted to cover anyway, and that's to do with property types. So, and I think both Paula and Les could probably talk to this as well. How does Beyond deal with larger properties, and also how does it deal with properties of different quality standards? So a luxury versus a more basic property, for example, even if they have the same occupancy. So I don't know if you want to speak briefly to that, Jess, and then we can ask for experience from Les and Paula.
Yeah, well, actually, can I flip that twice? Is that okay? I'd love to hear how Les and Paula talk about
absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Paula?
Okay, well, I mean, I only have one type of, although I have different sizes within my complex, so my smallest property is 1 bedroom, my largest property is 4 bedrooms and sleeps 8. The standard of them is all the same. So once I've decided my base price based on the size of the property, Beyond Pricing is doing the rest for me. So it's not really a huge amount of variance for me. It's probably more relevant to Les because he has different types of properties for different owners and different levels of standard.
Great point. How about you, Les?
Yeah, I don't know, Paula, because I mean, you mentioned that you get the price, you know where the base price, roughly where you want the base price to be. We're back to control again. It's not the magic computers making all the decisions here. It's you set the base price because you know what the base price should be from that property. So we might have a 2-bedroomed apartments in Inverness that's high end and is double the money from one that's not budget, but I'm not trying to downplay any of the properties by any means, but you've got two very different properties, but you know the base, but you know where that property should be priced at anyway. So that's about getting the base price right to start with, and then once you've and Beyond will help you with that, and then once you've done that, you just need to keep an eye on it for the first short while to make sure Beyond, I haven't mentioned getting into sort of technicalities of health scores and such like, but the software has a health score, so you can see how it's tracking 30 days out, 90 days out, whether you're hitting the minimums. So you can see those key data points, and that allows you, and Beyond will help you with that, to see is that base price correct. And once you've tweaked it to get it where it needs to be, it's pretty much there ongoing, just needs the odd bit of tweaking.
Can I just ask you, Les, how do you price your city properties compared to your rural properties? Do you tend to use percentage for the rural and nightly rates for the city ones?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we went in to start with urban, and it was daily rates because that worked well. Most sort of urban properties are Booking.com and Airbnb from an OTA's point of view are where most of the traffic will come from them. And these guys, their platforms are more comfortable with daily rates. But when you get into the rural side of things, traditionally the owners prefer to work, and if you're on short breaks that are whatever 70% 3 nights, 70% the weekly tariff, the length of stay pricing works better for the rural side of things. Even if it's an apartment in a sort of rural location, which you get a few of them. So, but again, that flexibility is there.
And Les, have you taken a different approach to properties that tend to have more short break stays versus properties that typically have mostly weekly bookings? Do you have a different approach to your base price, for example, or pricing model that you would use for each of those scenarios?
I mean, I suppose yes and no. I mean, every property is different. So, yeah. It's difficult. Okay, you can take 2-bedroom apartments in Inverness, they're all roughly about in the same sort of space. But as soon as you sort of go a little bit more rural, every property's got something different to offer. The owner's expectations may be different. So you really need to look at everything on an individual basis, and you've got the flexibility to do that with Beyond. Yes, it will scrape the data. And another part of the tool you can see within Beyond is you can see competitor spaces and what the estimated base prices that everyone else is selling at. So you can see that data in there as well, which gives you a comparison to say, well, when I'm pitching in my base price for this particular property, is that likely to be the same as that 4-bedroom luxury property, or that 2-bedroom log cabin in the middle of nowhere? So you can again, there's plenty data within Beyond to make those decisions.
Great, thank you, Les. I know we're getting towards our hour's time, and I know that everybody has things they do in the evenings, so we're all busy. But there's one last thing I wanted to ask both of you for your experience on, and that's booking patterns. Since you started using Beyond, have you noticed any kind of change in booking patterns across some or all of your properties? Has your lead time shortened, or what's your experience been with that?
Okay, well, definitely during July and August, for some reason this year, I had a lot of short bookings. My minimum stay in July and August is 3 nights. I've actually increased it to 4 nights for next year because it was just with COVID and the lack of availability of staff, it just was a massive headache. I just found it impossible to get staff. And although the revenue was very welcome, the flip side of that was that it was just a nightmare trying to get the properties cleaned to the standard that I wanted them cleaned. And lead time is definitely shorter, and I don't know whether that's a general trend or whether that's because of Beyond pricing. I'm not sure, or whether that's just the market at the moment.
And Les?
That's a difficult question because each year you think, right, what's the strategy here, and you're trying to compare one year against, and trying to compare what's just happened over the last 18 months or 2 years and say, well, is that because of what we were doing with Beyond? I don't know, because it's been very, very fluid at the end of the day. One thing I have noticed about the booking patterns is, as Paula said, is the lead times are either very short or massively long. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground where we're sitting at the moment. We've got bookings that are coming in for July, August, September, October next year, and quite a lot of them are coming in, and it's been quite surprising at some of the rates that have been coming in, which has been interesting and good. Or we've got the other side of the coin, whereas somebody wants to arrive tomorrow or the day after, and there doesn't seem to be any middle ground at the moment.
Yeah, and to that, I do think it's probably a blend of Beyond and COVID, because I've been at Beyond almost 4 years now, and in general we do see booking lead times shorten, because what happens is, as we were talking about before, the cheapest places get booked up first, and so a lot of people plan a holiday a year in advance, but a lot of people like me plan 6 months in advance, 6 weeks in advance, 6 days in advance. So, you want to make sure that you're getting a good blend of people booking at those different times, rather than, perhaps opening the calendar in January for that year and booking out the year. So I think that's part of it. And then, a couple of trends that we saw with COVID that have been shifting, but it's been interesting to watch is, month-long stays in rural areas or remote areas that tended to only have week-long stays in the summer, or perhaps even, short breaks in the winter to fill occupancy. We're suddenly getting month-long stays. People looking to stay out of the city or, work remotely since they didn't have to be in an office. So we actually saw the length of stay time increase, and then has decreased back down and settled. And then the booking lead time, same thing. We were seeing, it was incredibly short, to Les's point, across the board, people booking to go the next day. And now we're seeing that sort of stabilize a little bit closer to some of the patterns that we were seeing in the past. But yeah, booking lead time is one thing that usually shifts with Beyond.
Thank you, Jess. That's really great. So what I would like to do is I'd like to just have one last question for Paula and Les, and that is, what would be your top #1 reason for exploring Beyond? So I know for me, it's been actually revenue. It's been really understanding what I should be charging my guests, and realizing that I was far too cheap before. So for me, it's been the additional revenue that it's got me. But what would each of you say was your top reason? Maybe it's saving time, maybe it's making your life easier. What would be your top #1 reason why you would recommend Beyond to somebody else in your position? So Paula first, what would yours be?
Well, like you, Tobias, it's definitely a couple of things, I guess. Revenue massively, because I know that looking through the statistics that I can drill down to in SuperControl, that my average daily rate has gone up by 48%, which is phenomenal.
Wow, wonderful.
So I was definitely undercharging. And then the other side of that is, why am I trying to crack a nut when there's an algorithm that does it much better? And it just allows me to spend my time looking after my guests and hopefully creating the experience that is what they're paying for at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paula. That's wonderful. And how about you, Les? What's your #1?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Time, and we're an agency, so we work for our owners. So it's making sure that we're doing the best job we can for our owners by maximising the revenue. And ultimately, we're an agency on commission, so we get more commission as well. So everybody's happy. But yeah, customer retention for us as well, as we grow the business, we want to keep our clients happy, more revenue.
Absolutely. That's really great. Well, thank you so much for being here this evening and taking time out of your busy schedules to share your experiences. And thank you so much as well, Jess. It's been a great benefit, as always, to have you here with your smile and your cheery disposition, and sharing your knowledge and expertise too. So I know that we're planning another of these sessions. So watch this space. We're going to be doing another session on Beyond with our partners here at Beyond. So yeah, I'll leave the last word to you, Jess.
Yeah, a big thank you to you, Tobias, and really to the whole SuperControl community. You know, it's been such a joy to work with alongside and get to know a lot more of you over the last year in particular. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes next.
Thanks. Well, have a great evening, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Good night.